Okay, it's recording. I do, if you need me to edit anything out, I've never had that request, but I'm always happy to.
Okay, cool.
And also, just so you know about my podcast, I'm not the type of person that like writes notes and is very formal. So it's more of like a natural flowing conversation
Cool.
and to give the listener a feel that they're eavesdropping in basically on an interesting conversation, which I personally always find more interesting to listen to two people talking and having a natural conversation than like someone reading their notes. Um, but the good thing is that I invite people on that I'm naturally very curious to hear a lot about them, and this is extra fascinating to me. Um, I would say morbidly fascinating, but actually not because it has a really happy ending.
Yeah.
Um, and so I feel like I would let you um, like where do you think is the best place to start, or would you rather that I'm gonna give a tiny intro, but you're gonna correct me because I might get some wrong. Um, do you pronounce your name Kasim Hafeez?
Yeah.
Kas okay, phew. Okay, okay. So this is Kasim Hafeez, and I have the privilege to have him on my podcast. He grew up one way and basically completely turned his whole I wouldn't say his ideology, but the ideology that he was taught around through his own research and um, his own discovery. And I love that because I always ask people, even like my fellow Jewish people, I always ask them like people that are really, really religious. I'm like, okay, but if you were born Muslim, like you would have just been a devout Muslim. And if you were born Christian, so when I see someone that is like, even if they're keeping their religion or whatever it is, but like the idea of having your own mind and you using your own mind to think of new things that people aren't just spitting at you, it's pretty fascinating, and also it's inspiring the specific thing that we're referring to. So I'm gonna let you explain what I'm referring to.
Okay.
And I think people will be fascinated with me and also very appreciative
Okay. I can't.
of
Oh,
of
man,
the path that you chose.
you built up so much expectation, so I've got.
Okay.
Um, sorry about that. So yeah, I grew up in England. My family are from Pakistan, and I grew up Muslim, and I, I guess essentially became I mean, it sounds strange when you say it. I became a radical or an extremist. I was a radical and an extremist, and there's a lot of reasons for that, which I think are some are very unique to living in the UK, and some not so much. And I went along this path and I find the more I've kind of been retrospective and researched in things, I think with any sort of radicalism or extremism or I guess anything which is kind of cultish, which I
Yeah.
think most like radical ideologies are, it, they continue to push you to more extremes. And I was kind of in that circle of thought. And a lot of it revolved around animosity to the West, hatred of the Jews first and foremost. And I
Was it
think,
like if you spilled your milk in the morning, was it like, oh, the Jews?
I mean, it wasn't
Or no?
it wasn't to that extreme, but it wasn't that far. I mean, I can literally remember times where so there's a store in the UK, I don't know if it still exists, like called the Car Phone Warehouse where they
Yeah.
sold cell phones. And I remember going to get a cell phone and the price was much higher than I thought it should have been. And literally, I remember like audibly saying Jews. Like and it's completely like it's
Was there like some type of rationalization when someone was thinking rationally and they're like, okay, there's a logic behind this. What was their like what was they must have had some type of explanation. They must have said like, well, they I don't know, they own everything or something.
so
So
that really
what
was
was it that
like the Jews ultimately control everything. At the behind everything, the Jews ultimately control it.
and what was the proof that they brought for that? Or it was just a
I
matter of
mean, there
repeating it
wasn't.
over and over?
It was a matter of repeating it,
Okay,
and
makes sense.
it's. like you've got me thinking, like what was there wasn't. It was almost like this sleight of hand where you go like, well, look at this, well, look at
Yeah.
this. Well,
Yeah.
obviously the Jews control everything. It's like
To
I
have a therapeutic scapegoat, basically.
yeah, and especially like where I grew up, it was, and I think this is common with many new immigrant communities, especially when you come from a completely different culture like Pakistan was compared to England. We our neighborhood wasn't the greatest. There were a lot of issues, poverty, all these things. It's easier to blame someone else rather than go, okay, this is unfortunate, but this is what
Right.
happens because like my grandparents came to England not speaking the language. They didn't come with, they didn't have degrees, they weren't doctors. Like my granddad worked at a factory for most of his working life. So if you couple that with this sense of, which I think permeates a lot in the East, this sense of Islamic pride that, Muslims at one time controlled most of, the world with the Muslim empires, and now you're living in the hood in England. How did that happen? Well,
In
probably
the
the Jews.
West, right?
Right. It's probably the Jews. Like, makes sense. Like, that's kind of the rationale. Like, I know, I look, I
I'm
get it.
so sorry. I'm so sorry for forcing you, a person that I didn't know
Right.
from across the world when I wasn't born yet. Yeah,
So
we're so
yeah.
sorry. But I am sorry, like for whatever you went through. Not that I had anything to do with it, but I'm sorry.
But yeah, so that's kind of like these lines are drawn. It's, you see there's that meme of the guy who's like got all of these strings and papers and he's like this conspiracy theory. It's kind of
Yeah.
it is. It's not kind of, it is like that. You
Oh,
draw,
oh, oh, the where he's
yeah,
like that
like
with his the
literally,
eyes wide. Yeah.
right. It literally is that, and you're like, oh, well, it's the Jews. It makes sense.
That's funny. By the way, have you ever heard of Kohlberg's theory of moral reasoning?
No, I haven't.
In psychology, there's levels of in the development of moral reasoning. Where you're at, typically the phases are typically at certain ages, but some people reach above, their maturity of moral reasoning. And I don't remember the nuances, like the exact, but it's somewhat of the idea. Like there's maybe like 10 or 7 levels, but in the beginning, it starts off with like good, bad. Like if you did something wrong, you shouldn't do something because you're gonna get like something will happen to you as a result, like a consequence. Or then like eventually you learn like, oh, but like or you're so you're afraid of the law, like what will happen if you do a crime. But then you're actually afraid of like, okay, but it's morally wrong whether I get in trouble or not. I don't want to do it because of that. And like more and more until the point I should have this see maybe I should be someone that writes notes, but until the point where you basically you're even able to see like when other people, if I'm incorrect in this, hopefully I'm not, but you're basically able to see even when other people do something wrong, you're not quick to judge them of, oh, they had bad intentions or whatever it is. You're able to like reason above it. And like I feel like in your case, I guess on one hand, like the fact that you were an extremist, like you shouldn't be afraid to say that because you should just know that actually gives us hope, because when we see like, oh, there's someone that was over here and is able to go over there, wow, like that means someone like other people we see that are over here, it's possible for them. I mean, it's rare, but it's possible for them to go over there because we see it happen before. Um, and then also, I lost my train of thought, but I was gonna
Do
say,
that all the time.
yeah, it's terrible. I'm telling you, I need help. Um, so what was I saying? I'm telling you, it was important. Um, it had to do with the moral reasoning thing, maybe. Um, what was it? Oh, so on one hand, it gives us hope. On the other hand, and it's not really a contradiction,
Yeah.
but just adding the fact that like it happens to be that maybe you are on a higher level of moral reasoning. You were able to like be more mature in your moral reasoning and be more developed in that sense, whereas not everyone is made the same. Some people are more likely in any religion, in any society, to take whatever is given to them and not question it and not go outside the bounds. it's like easier to do that, and some people are just more comfortable and don't have any reason to break outside of it, or with this maturity and under in like going beyond what's around you in the vacuum in your bubble. um but yeah, so those are that I find interesting to like. I just wonder how much it plays a part in, if you, all of the things that you discover through reading, through traveling, and I want you to expound upon that, but all those things that you, all, like the journey that you had in order to come to that discovery. I just wonder if someone else in your position would be able to come to that same discovery and be open to it, or if they have to have that same moral reasoning you have also.
It's
But it definitely helps to have to
yeah,
see the facts.
and that's a really interesting point. Because
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about conversations I had with, I guess, former friends, where you get stuck in this infinite loop where they're like, but this is what's happening. I'm like, no, 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 this is what's happening. This is what I've seen with my own eyes. This is what I've experienced. And it's like they're just stuck in a, okay, I hear what you're saying, but you're wrong.
Have you
Like
ever invited them, like, come to Israel with me?
I have like multiple times. I've with so many different friends, and it is I think that's been one of the most frustrating things with friends and family. There is an element of, like with anything, you like I can talk about, I was gonna say politics, but okay,
Yeah.
you can talk about
Talk
politics.
whatever you want.
Yeah, and like I can disagree with people, and it's like it's cool. Like we disagree, we have completely different opinions. Like we'll go back and forth, and we're cool. Life goes on.
Yeah.
When it came to this with like family and friends, it was we do not want to hear it. It was it's
An
literally
emotional block?
and a physical block. I mean, the level of I'm like we were 1 degree away from people putting their like fingers in their ears and like going nah nah nah, nah. Like literally, I'm not even kidding.
Wow.
Like grown
Do you
adults.
feel like because it was part of the building of their identity and feeling like they belong to something and their pride, it's hard to, if you take one brick out of the foundation, you're afraid the whole thing will crumble and it's scary. So there's a level of, an element of like cognitive dissonance or something like that where you're just like, it's a protection, it's a coping mechanism of like, if you tell me this and I actually allow it to be absorbed, like everything else is going to have to somehow, nothing else is going to make sense. Now I have to make sense of everything all over again. Like this is part of my puzzle.
I
Don't break it
no,
or
I think
everything will collapse.
right. No, I think you're spot on. And I think also it comes from how Islam is taught. Like growing up, how
Interesting.
Islam is taught is this very, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, but
I can't correct you on
no, no, no,
Islam. You would
no,
know
no,
more
no,
than
it wasn't going to
me.
be about Islam. It's
Yeah.
about Judaism.
Okay.
With Judaism, there's a lot of asking why. Like with
Yeah.
everything, throughout history, rabbis gone, but why do we do
Two
this?
Jews, three opinions.
Right.
You heard of that? Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so in Islam, it's a very, this is what is said, and that's it.
Oh, interesting.
And look, there are some traditions which do, but there is definitely a culture, and I would say a dominant culture of you just don't question it. Like there are a lot of things we did ritual wise, which I'm like, I don't know why we do it. We just did it. So, and it all gets kind of enmeshed into
We
everything.
have some commandments like that too, and they're called chukim, and you're not supposed to question why, because God's wisdom is infinite and we're finite, so we can't understand the infinite or whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, I hear you that it's a general like don't ask questions, that kind of.
Uh, uh,
I personally would specifically ask questions if someone told me not to. I'd be like, wait, that's suspicious. Why are you afraid of me answering questions? Like, are you afraid of there's no answer?
and that's kind of what it is. It all gets tied into because like the Middle East conflict between Israel and the Arabs, like on a theological level, for Muslims, it's not a religious conflict. Like, I mean, it just isn't. Like
So
Mecca and
what is it?
Medina,
What is it then if it's not a
I mean,
religion?
it's taken a religious element on because it's been infused, but ultimately it's a territorial dispute for the Jewish people. It's it's biblical. Like
Right.
Jerusalem is the center of the Jewish world. Islam came along much later, occupied Jerusalem for a time, and then you just had like Arab rejection of a Jewish state, period. Like anywhere. Like it could have been in a deserted part of Saudi Arabia, the Arabs still would have disagreed. They still would have had an issue. I think that
Right.
is so. But it's now from the Arab perspective, they infused faith into it very early on. Because here's the thing, you have however millions of Arabs opposing the creation of a Jewish state and a Jewish homeland, you turn it into a Muslim issue. Now you have a billion people from Pakistan to Turkey to, you know, Africa who are all now have an issue with this. You turn what is a saying, because ultimately, and like India and Pakistan, the dispute over Kashmir and the creation of Pakistan, these are two nuclear powered countries.
Kashmir, like a place, not the material.
No, so Kashmir, there's a
Okay.
territory, essentially a state which India control 2/3, Pakistan control 1/3, and that is one of the main points of conflict between the two countries. And it's a territorial dispute, and neither side has the spiritual connection to the land like the Jewish people have to the land of Israel. It just isn't. It is purely territorial.
And the world honestly doesn't really care about these disputes. They
Right.
only they only care when we're involved for some reason. I don't understand the obsession, but it's there.
And that's the thing. Like there was the former president of Pakistan wrote in his book, I don't understand why we're being more Palestinian than the Palestinians. Like Pakistan doesn't recognize Israel's right to exist, but nobody in the Muslim world cares about the Kashmir issue.
Right, because there's no common enemy to join
Right.
over.
And that's the thing. So that it's been turned into like a Muslim issue. So when you talk about it, people see it as, oh my God, like this is attacking a core of my faith. And it's like, oh no, not really. It's
Right.
not. And
Also, the thing is, like, and I know you already know this, like, Jewish people in Israel are happy to coexist with anyone and everyone. It's not a matter of it's ours and not yours. It's just a matter of, like, please don't kill us and please don't kick us out.
right.
And then the people that are, extremists are, I mean, and you would know more than I, but from what I've seen, is it's very much the ideology of we cannot coexist. We want you dead. We want you out. Like, just get out. So the people in Israel are like, get out of Israel. The people out of Israel are like, go back to your homeland, but you don't have a homeland. The Holocaust never happened, but we're so happy it happened. Like, none of it makes any sense.
Right. No, I mean, and that's a really valid point.
Yeah.
I I grew up with people like Hitler was a great, like my father would say, like Hitler was
Yeah.
a great man. He didn't kill enough Jews. And then like the same people are going, well, they used the Holocaust to justify Israel, but it never happened.
Yeah.
So
You have to laugh. I mean,
yeah,
I mean, I'd rather do that than cry. My grandmother was a Holocaust survivor. She was in Auschwitz and everything, and like seeing hashtags on Facebook and whatever, like brown shirts, or I don't know, because the Nazis wore brown shirts. Like it feels almost like the vigilante, like it feels very performative in a sense, but in another sense, I'm grateful for, okay, I'll take anything other than like the Kanye tweets because like we'll take what we can get type of thing. But it's just
yeah,
so weird. It's not even a complaint because I'm happy they're putting a hashtag and
yeah.
it's good. It's odd to see something dumbed down to just like when it's really like it I mean the way like she described like the experiments on babies and things like that, and it's just terrific. um I'm going all over the place. That's how my brain works. If there's something specific you want to tell me, I want to hear. And also I think people will be really curious like I am to know specifically like the timeline of your journey and how you went from a Muslim extremist to like our nice Muslim cousin. um, and like how, and by the way, yeah, see, I'm all over the place. How is it possible? I mean, okay, I'm wondering, do do Muslims real like, is it a thing? Do you guys have like when you're growing up, do you guys are you guys aware that now you are obviously, but like that we're cousins, like genetically? Is that a thing? Is that a point of like we hate our cousins, or they don't even know we're cousins, or they don't care that we're cousins, or they say we're not?
I think it varies from community to community, especially within kind of the South Asian Muslim community. It's just not a thing. And so it's interesting. I've seen like the first time I encountered that was actually in Israel, like from Israelis. prior to that, I'd never. It's just
Really?
a thing.
Apparently, like Arabic and Hebrew come from Aramaic, and so they're both like Aramaic languages. And like there's so many names that we name our kids that are like Ibrahim, Avraham, like I don't know, I'm sure there's many more
Yeah.
that are so similar. It's
And and
interesting.
and that was one of the other things that stood out to me, like the similarities from a faith practices. Like there's just so many kind of things which are similar.
Yeah.
Um, and honestly, like so when I got married a few years ago, my best man, or one of my really good friends, was Jewish.
And I'm curious to hear about how you met your wife.
And like it's funny, we joke all the time. So his family are part German, part Libyan.
Oh, wow.
And like honestly, like Pakistanis and Jews, we have way too much in common. We're always late. Like grandparents are gonna force feed you whether you like it or not. Like you're never gonna be
So
good
funny.
enough in appearance. Like there's just so many. It's like
That
really
is
not
so
that
funny.
different. Like we're
I've watched like any comedy, that comes into my feed. Sometimes I've seen it from like Muslims and it's hilarious and it's so relatable. I love what's that couple? Um they're in what's their names? Everyone knows who they are. They live in, that it's an Arab country, but it's very friendly towards the Jewish people.
Dubai.
Um in
Oh,
okay, maybe I'll think of it soon. Salama and is his name Mohammed? I don't know. Yeah, maybe.
uh,
Anyway, when I think of it, they're very funny. But that doesn't really help us right now. Um, I mean it does, honestly. I feel like in general with hate, when people constantly try to combat hate with hate, like it never works.
no.
Obviously, we need to call it out, we need to acknowledge it, we need to validate it, that's for sure. And by the way, you do like a huge job of that, which is a huge, huge deal to us because all the time it's Jews complaining about what's happening to the Jews, and it doesn't really help us ever because we're just complaining to each other. And everyone else is just like, oh, you guys are whining, and we're like, yeah, we're whining, and you don't care. Like no, and it doesn't do anything. It doesn't help us. So when someone else is whining for it, it's like, if you advertise yourself and you're like, everyone come to my business, it's really good, like nobody's gonna listen to you. But if someone else
Right.
gives a 5-star review, it's like, oh, like
Let me go
it's not
check that
biased.
out. Like, yeah.
We'll hear what they have to say. So it's such a relief to have someone from the outside be like, okay, hello, like can you guys stop killing them? Okay, cool. Like it's nice to for someone else to not want us dead. We really appreciate
You're welcome. Like,
it. And yeah, so you were telling me how you were getting married and your best friend was Jewish or something. You said you had similarities.
it's just
So
like the similarities are just wild. Like, and it's like here is me, like grew up in England, family from Pakistan. I have more in common with a Jewish person from Alabama. I know, random, but like, like he lives at
I mean, I'm from Wisconsin, so
right.
yeah.
So yeah, we just have more in common. Like there's and like even the really annoying things where you're like, oh my God. It's like, yeah, we also have those in common. Like this is
Right. Even like the actual, even not even like just the culture of, I'm sure you have like a big thing on hospitality, right?
yeah,
And things like that, like a big focus on certain commandments. And then um you also have a lot of like we have times for prayer and all that stuff, like so many times a day. I mean, I think you guys have like 5 times a day. We have 3 times a day. It's mostly the men doing it
yeah.
as well with you guys probably. Um, and um, yeah, it's more like conservative also in a lot of senses. Um, so wait, so what happened? So you got married, and then what happened next? Wait, so
Okay.
you got married before all this
Oh
discovery
no,
happened?
way after. Way
Okay.
after. So
Because
we've
I
jumped
noticed,
ahead.
like, I saw one video. I don't remember what it was, but I think you mentioned, like, it was your wife or something, and she was talking about anti-Semitism. So, does that make
So
sense? Did I see that or did I imagine that? On your
possibly
on your Instagram feed, like she's having an interview or something.
it's very possible. So my wife works also in the pro-Israel field and combating anti-Semitism. That's how
Wow.
we met. We met at a conference.
Wow.
I did not make a good first impression because I really do. Um, I'm a
Well,
very
obviously, whatever you did, it worked.
I have a very dark British sense of humor that most Americans don't get, and they're just like,
This is
man,
so
he's a
funny. Wait, I need to
prick.
hear.
But
I need
like,
to hear about the bad impression.
well, so we've met like we were introduced just because we were both doing similar jobs in terms of digital media, and I can't remember what she said. She said something like, "Oh, you're kind of like famous, right?" And I was like, "Yeah," like very dismissive, and I don't know. I just
Like playing it cool.
yeah, I'm just like it's like being a famous gardener, like cool. Like a lot of people in the pros world know me.
Famous gardener.
But it's like a very niche kind of like it's like to other people in gardening, you're really cool, but everyone else is like, all right, good for you, bro. So
Oh my God.
so like we met and we didn't really talk that time. And then I was back in Vegas where she lived at the time in May of that year. Again, we'd not been in touch at all.
Yeah.
And I spoke at this at a church, and she and some of her colleagues came, and they're talking afterwards, and we're just talking, and they're like, "Yeah, we do trivia and go rollerblading." I'm like, "Oh, cool! You guys are really cool going rollerblading." I was like, "What the
Wait, you were
heck?"
sarcastic?
Yes,
Oh no.
and I don't mean it maliciously. It's just like part of my. So she was like, "This guy's a complete prick," which understandably so. And then in
Oh my God.
December of the same year, so I messaged her on Facebook out of the blue. And again, it seems very crept into her DMs, but there is context. So she put on Facebook,
By the
it's
way, it's not creepy to go into someone's DMs, depending on how you do it and what your connection is to them. If you already knew her in real life,
yeah,
and it's not so weird, honestly. It's not.
so yeah,
If
I
you
mean,
don't know someone, there's a way to do it. I don't
right,
know.
that's
Yeah.
fair. I
Yeah.
appreciate the
Yeah.
validation with that one.
Just don't publicize. I'm joking. It's on fuck.
Take a screenshot now.
Yeah.
Well, she put this thing on about, hey, it's Christmas. I like getting Christmas cards, and if anybody wants me to send them a Christmas card, send me a message. I'll send you a Christmas card. Blah blah. I thought, oh, that's really cool. I'd like a Christmas card. And I was like, I don't really know this girl. I don't think I made a good impression, so I'm just not gonna say anything. But
Wait, she's Christian and you're Muslim?
so I'm Christian now.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, that's a plot twist.
Okay.
We can get to that too.
Okay.
But yeah, so I was like, I don't know this girl that well. But then
Was
I was like,
she, sorry, was she also, she grew up Muslim and she's Christian now?
no,
Or,
she's like the the best way to explain it. She grew up in Florida,
yeah.
and the first time I went to meet her parents, I was like, there's a lot of Confederate flags around here. It seems to be
Oh, really?
real popular theme.
Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
so
Did
some
you have
very
any in-laws at your wedding from either side?
no, we did have so her family were fine. They were like cool with
Oh,
it.
okay, that's good.
But yeah, it's very small town kind of.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that was different. But yeah,
Interesting.
so very different backgrounds. But yeah, I messaged her, we got talking, kind of hit it off, and then we're like, hey, we should hang out sometime. And we did long distance for a while, and then
How long have you guys been married?
why would you ask me this? I've got to calculate this now.
You're gonna be in trouble later
4 years,
for not
4 years.
remembering. Four
I have
years?
yes.
Okay. Wow.
So yeah.
Nice. Okay, so when in this story, so I guess you said it happened way before you met your wife. So
Yeah.
what is the timeline? Like in that article that you sent me?
Yeah.
Okay, the Zoom is gonna end soon, but we're not gonna succumb to this punishment. We're gonna we're gonna whatever.
Right.
We don't care. Even though we do. Okay, so the article that you sent me, it was very like I felt like that was like really, really fascinating the way that it explained, but I wanted to kind of hear like more of the details of that story. So if you
Yeah.
can basically yeah. So it says
No.
we have 9 minutes and 25 seconds left. So if you get cut off, I'll resend you.
Yeah. Okay. So growing up, like started to embrace radicalism, and also like these more extremists. So here's the interesting thing. So like
Yeah.
my family and community, anti-Semitism was common. Like these conspiracy theories were common. But in terms of what I say, and a lot of people struggle with this, but this is what like genuinely my experience. What I say my community on the whole was extreme and radical. Honestly, it wasn't. Like there was this one kind of issue which was a weird obsession because like we didn't know anyone Jewish. We weren't in contact with any Jewish communities. Not that that would have made it okay, but like this was it
Do you
was
think
odd.
that's kind of part of it? Because when you don't know someone personally, it's easier to dehumanize them because
Oh,
you're
100%.
not, you don't
Because
have a connection with them.
yeah, because they're them rather than an actual person with
Right,
a family and feelings and
right.
I think that is a huge, definitely a huge part of it. Like for me, it really was because how do you demonize someone that you know as a friend? Like how do you demonize someone? And people still do, but how when you know someone on a personal level, it's a lot easier to dislike somebody that you don't know at all for something they do. Like we have a lot more grace for people that are close to us. Like things we forgive family for, we would not forgive a stranger for,
Right,
it
right. There's crazy stories in the Holocaust of like, oh, this guy's life was saved because the Nazi that saw him remembered that he said good morning to him every morning when he walk out of his house, so he
uh,
saved his life or something. Like just small things like, okay, but he's a Nazi. But the point is
well,
that
uh,
the point is that like even there, I mean, there are many Nazis where let's say they didn't have kind of a harder soul in what they were doing, and then there were many that were brainwashed to genuinely believe that they were, these people aren't really human. I'm not really being cruel, which I can't comprehend how you can come to that. However, like it shows that when they're like given like in certain situations when they're given that like human interaction, there's no denying it.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, okay, so you when did you
So
yeah.
so yeah, so I would say so when the whole satanic verses thing kind of blew up with Salman Rushdie's book, that was a huge turning point, especially for Muslims in the UK, because prior to that, like the Muslim community, which was predominantly Pakistani, Bengali, some Indian, like basically like the former colonies of Britain, um, we were kind of seen in stereotypes like, oh, they care about family, they're hardworking, and then
That's not bad.
yeah, like it wasn't bad at all, and
Yeah.
then this book comes out, which Muslims find incredibly offensive, and for
I'm
Muslims.
you can you elaborate just a tiny bit on it?
Yeah,
I'm
sure.
not familiar with it.
So Salman Rushdie, who is
I
a
heard of his name, but I don't know.
British Indian author, wrote
Okay.
this book called Satanic Verses. It is a work of fiction, but he bases it on real events almost. So uh, there are some verses that almost made it into the Quran, which they say that were not from God. That basically Muhammad was almost deceived by Satan and etc. etc. So he then creates this whole story around this. Muslims felt that some of the depictions of Muhammad and it doesn't specifically say Muhammad, but he's using that story. And they found that and other depictions of characters who are very integral to Islam incredibly offensive. And it's one of those things where it's a question of perspective, where things that people say about Christianity or Judaism, like comedians, are incredibly offensive, but people are like, well, okay, it is what it is. In Islam, that's not really how it works. You say something offensive, especially if
You get
you're
killed?
yeah, basically, I'm like, how do I say this diplomatically? All right, cool, there we go.
Well, your
Uh,
head is off of your neck after that.
yeah, maybe you'll make it. Who knows? But yeah, like you get killed.
Oh
And being
boy.
in Britain, like there wasn't much anyone could do. So these communities started protesting and were very vocal. They burnt copies of Rushdie's book. Rushdie went into hiding for years. I mean, he got stabbed recently because
Oh
of
my
something that
God.
happened 30 years ago.
Wow.
Iran, Khomeini put a death sentence on him. So, and it just changed everything. It changed the focus of, hold on, can this community actually coexist here? We believe in freedom of speech, and they want to kill someone, and they're burning books in the streets and having these massive protests. And for a lot of people in my generation who were young when that was happening, we felt a disconnect. And this is one of the things that I always say about European society, particularly Britain, because that's where I grew up. It's different from American and Canadian society, like the other two places I've lived. In Canada and America, and again, anywhere you go, there is always going to be racism and bigotry, where there are people, unfortunately, that's just one of those things. But European society has this ingrained notion to be European is to be a white Anglo-Saxon. Hence, I was born in Britain, but have never really felt British. I've lived here in the US for 4 or 5 years, and like I feel very American, positives and negatives of that. But I feel part of this country in the same way I felt part of Canada.
Because it's a melting pot.
Right. And Britain has this approach.
I didn't know that.
I mean, I always say to people, like, look at how many young Muslims from Europe, from France, Britain, Belgium, went off to join ISIS compared to from the US and Canada.
Because they needed a sense of identity.
Yeah, they felt more loyal or more belonging with this group that resonated with them than the countries that they were born in. I mean, and then you look at how many, I can give England as an example, how many British Muslims, and there are around 3 to 4 million, joined the British Army. At the last time I ever looked at statistics, it was less than 1,000. Where in the US, thousands of Muslims joined the US Army because they feel this is their home and they feel part of it. So I think that's a massive part of why radicalization has found such fertile ground in Europe. And with all of this happening, with the satanic versus affair, us growing up around it, Muslims getting renewed focused, and some of the newspaper articles that, would never be published today. Like there were some things which were just, I laughed.
Like what did it say?
Like there was a newspaper article, there's a documentary about this on
Okay, wait, can you not forget what you're gonna say? And I'm pressing stop because I don't want it to stop recording. Don't forget, okay? Okay, we'll be back. Oh, I was gonna imitate it and say it's in session, but I got it completely wrong. Okay. Okay. So where were we? Oh, you were saying
newspaper headlines. Yeah.
Newspaper headlines. Yeah.
Yeah. So I remember one where it had like this guy, a visibly like Muslim dude, like burning a copy of Satanic Verses, and the headline was, I might be off by a word or two, but it was like mad Muslims burning books. like the face of
the
hate.
Author is, I mean, he was probably the next person to get burned, so I don't know why.
So yeah, so
not very smart.
Yeah, so it was just a really wild time. But yeah, it really opened the door for more kind of young Muslims to question where they fit into Western society, and that opened the door for a lot of extremist groups to really get a foothold. I mean, it makes sense. It's awful, but it made sense. I mean, you had a population who didn't feel they belonged. When you grow up Muslim, like, it's not something you do once a week. It's part of everything you do.
It's completely immersive. Yeah.
Right. So
we have that in common too.
So when you have people coming in, like organizations going, hey, like this is who you are, this is your identity, like we can give you a sense of purpose, it's incredibly attractive. And it has positives and negatives, because look, there are organizations who do that, and it's for the right reasons. It's getting young Muslims engaged in society, doing charity work and all those things. So, and because that's the last thing I want to do, because it is really easy to look at Muslims with suspicion. And because, I grew up Muslim, there are a lot of people who will take what I say and go, oh my God, look, he said, like, they're all a danger. And it's like, okay, you need to chill out and relax.
Right.
But we do have an issue with extremism in the Muslim community, and in Europe especially. And there are so many organizations and groups who used and manipulated that, and they reinforced bigotries that we already had. For example, I grew up with people saying anti-Semitic stuff, making awful comments. And then when that's then repeated when you're a teenager, and it's almost not justified, it's justified because they would basically show these pictures and go, this is a child. Like today on the internet, people use graphic images and don't really care where they come from, but go, this is what's happening.
Yeah.
They would do similar things, but with leaflets and printed out pictures. And, your brain literally will see this. You like, for me, say, I'm 15, I'm already like, the Jews are evil, America is evil. And then somebody goes, this kid was killed by the Israelis because she was Muslim, and it just reinforces it and goes, oh my God, like what kind of monsters kill a child for no reason? So it builds up even more hatred and resentment and anger. And you combine those, it's very easy to manipulate people.
I can imagine. Yeah, there's so many of those pictures that are supposedly about the IDF or something like that, and then you reverse Google image search and it's like from 2013 and it's a totally different army or something,
Right.
and then or they show the complete picture and then they're actually helping the baby who got hurt from an extremist from the other end in Gaza who sent a bomb, and the Israelis are trying to help the baby, like, and it's out of context. Like there's
Yeah,
so many pictures like that. Education is so important, and it's so dangerous also when it's used
and,
in
and
a
that's
dishonest way.
and that's the importance of the asking deeper questions. Like we live in a society where you have to question everything, and it's unfortunate,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you really have to. But again, like growing up, you just don't question things. And like I remember during Operation Pillar of Defense, like 2014, 2015, there was this image that kind of was circulated everywhere on Twitter, and it was basically somebody dead, like half of their body was mangled. It was from the movie Final Destination, like this horror movie, but like it'd been shared, and it was like the aftermath of an Israeli airstrike, and it's like, guys, like, come on. But
Right.
but when you're younger and you're just shown like a flyer, you don't,
Impressionable for
yeah,
sure.
like you don't really question it. You
How
just
are you supposed to know beyond what you're being shown? That's all you know. It
right.
makes sense. And
So
yeah.
yeah, so that's like me and many other people, and you start to embrace, you start to see the world differently. You start to see it in more combative terms. You go from a resentment, a dislike, or just being anti-Semitic to a legitimate, I don't know, like I don't know what the term would be, like a hatred, like an actual hatred of wanting to hurt Jewish people rather than
Have you
a
heard about the
dislike.
movie Farha or something like that on Netflix?
Oh yes, I
It's like
have.
a
Yeah,
complete blood libel on
right,
IDF soldiers. I feel like there's so many screenshots that will be taken from that movie and used for like news headlines when
right,
like Israelis get stabbed, then the headline, and then they get shot by an Israeli soldier who's trying to protect the guy that got stabbed, and then the headline is like Israeli shoots guy who happened to be, I don't know, walking with his butter knife by
right,
accident
exactly. Like
and
just
bumped
right.
into another Israeli and by accident stabbed him. Like none of the headlines really make
Yeah,
much sense.
it's
Um, wait, so I'm curious. So what happens next after you're feeling this? This is what you're being what's being impressed upon you as
so,
a teenager.
so I had kind of like it was there, but I was never like I'm in the game. What kind of changed that was in 2000. So I went to Pakistan. I'd go to Pakistan all the time to see family. And but in 2000, I guess having been exposed to all this stuff for the last few years, I I saw things that I guess in the past I just didn't really register. And like I have family who live in Pakistani controlled Kashmir, and at the time you had a number of terror groups who operated in those areas attacking India. And seeing that kind of face to face, seeing their propaganda face to face, it was, let me preface this. It when if I think about it now, I obviously from the mindset, I'm like, okay, this is really messed up.
Yeah.
They're posted like declaring war on the West, destroying India and Israel and America. But if you then look at it from where I was mentally then, I see myself as this victim. I'm a victim of the West and the Jews and America and Israel and India even. I feel helpless. And here is this little group of armed fighters in the
They're
name
like your
of,
heroes.
right, exactly. It's
Yeah.
inspiring. And it's so interesting because they create this narrative that we're all victims. And that's
It's almost like instead of a terror group, you're looking at it as a defense group.
right. Like it's, and I find with like these terror groups, it's almost like a pyramid scheme, it's like a multi-level market. Like they get you in, it's like, oh, this is interesting. And then you just get deeper and deeper. And it's like, but you created the problem that you say that you're trying to solve.
Right.
Um, but it's like I've seen this living in the US now too. I think one of the most dangerous things is creating a victim mentality when you're not a victim. Because it's a vicious cycle. Like so growing up
And
in
by the
England.
way, being a victim is one thing, blaming other people for your victim is another thing. And just for one's own sake, to be able to take responsibility is the only way you can empower yourself to actually become a survivor instead of a victim. So I feel like being a victim itself, if this is what you maybe also meant, like
Yeah.
being a victim itself isn't the issue. It's when everyone else is to blame, and then you'll never get out of your victimhood because they can't fix what they didn't create. So blaming the
Right.
wrong person, you'll just stay in your victimhood forever.
No,
Um,
you said
and
what
it's
I
like,
meant a lot better than I did. But no, 100%.
oh, and it's like therapeutic to whine about something over and over because it's almost like, and then you have a group of people complaining together. When you like you're
Right.
yelling at someone, but you're just yelling together. Like it's so annoying that they do this. Yeah, and it almost gives you, like you said, a sense of identity and a sense of pride.
But you move nowhere. Like you're still like for me, like
Right.
I was told that I was a victim of the West. Okay, like what does that even freaking mean? Like a victim, and all these things. Like you're a victim of British society. It's like cool. The food sucks. The weather sucks. I get it. Like, but it's
I've
like
always wondered that, like how, like what, when you look at the West and they're like blaming the West, is it when they see that the West is in like a better conditions, like with
I
wealth,
think
or
it's this.
the immorality that the West has, and then you're like, because of that,
I
the
think there's
world
this
is.
element of like it really like if you look at a group like Al Muhajirun or Hizb ut-Tahrir, who are these groups that were really effective in like the 90s and 2000s of like calling for the reestablishment of the caliphate, and they were recruiting a lot of young people in the UK and in Europe and all over, and they're obsessed with the year 1924, the year that the Ottoman Empire collapsed finally. And because there's this obsession with the past, which isn't a real past. This past of when the Muslims were strong and we, controlled all these
Oh,
places
so
and
it's
had
almost
these
like Make
empires.
America Great Again, the Muslim version.
Yeah, no, it genuinely is, and
Yeah,
it's based on because again, like my version of so I love history, but
I
like
see.
growing
I was gonna ask, are you a historian? But then I just shut
no,
up and
I
let you
like
just say your
no,
history.
I'm obsessed with history, and but like if I go to the history that I was taught, and you've probably come across this, like many Muslims are taught this idea of history, which isn't reality. It's like under the Muslim empires, the Jews and the Muslims got along great and everyone was fine and singing Kumbaya. And it's like,
That would have
that's
been
really
nice.
like
Well, I
not
don't see you
exactly.
trying to get back to that. I'm not telling you.
Yeah, but it is. It's like, let's be honest, were in some Muslim empires were Jews treated better than in Christian Europe? Yes. But look at how bad they were treated in Christian Europe. It was a minor improvement. It wasn't equals. It was
We only killed you on Tuesdays, okay?
right,
Be
exactly.
grateful.
Like it's like
Hashtag grateful.
should make that
Yeah.
a trend. Like no,
Yeah.
but there is. It's this rose-tinted idea of Muslim history, which just isn't reality. So being in a situation like I was, you're living in the poor part, like you're living in the hood, basically. Like it is what it is,
Yeah.
and you're not like making progress. It's like, well,
Well,
it's
that's
fun.
impressive though, that you are where you are as someone that influences other people to the degree that you do, coming from somewhere where you weren't built up, like you built yourself up. And that's
Right,
part of coming out of victimhood because
right,
you brought yourself out of victimhood. That's the only person that could bring anyone out of victimhood
a
themselves. So,
100%.
so you did it.
It makes thank you.
Yeah, it's
It
impressive.
also makes
It's a
me
big deal.
think. So one of my really close friends who passed away a few years ago,
I'm
Irving
sorry.
Roth, he was a Holocaust survivor. We actually made a documentary together.
Oh, that was the one
So
that you tattooed
yeah,
his number on
yeah,
your arm. Wow.
yeah. So
Can I see it in the
sure, I'm like incredibly hairy, so
Oh, wow. My
but
grandmother had a number on her arm too, but I mean,
yeah,
so did millions of others.
I asked his permission before I did it because I was like, I don't
Well,
know, like
clearly, yeah.
yeah,
I'm not worried about you.
yeah, no, but he was like the most positive, like funny, just there was no like he educated about what he experienced and warned, but he didn't let that experience define him. And I always thought that was inspiring. Like just like and I got very, I won't say salty, but a little like when he passed, like he was well known and everyone kept referring to him as, an Auschwitz survivor. And he was, but I'm like, no, he was a lot more though. Like
Right. That
Irving was
wasn't
hilarious.
his full
Like that,
identity.
like I get that was a huge part and but like
He was so much more than that.
yeah, so
Wait, so you have all these Jewish friends. I assume that happened after, even though,
yeah.
of course, when you become friends with people, it helps you humanize them. But like, I would assume that you didn't become friends with someone and then realize that you don't want to kill them. Like, I'm assuming that
Yeah, no, it was
that
after.
came
Yeah.
after. So, so how did you get to that point where you were like, oh, wait,
Oh, so
you said you read a book and you traveled, but what prompted you in the first
so
place to?
no, that's fair question. So I was at college. I was at my most radical, and I think and I know it's a lot worse now. Like I speak on college campuses, it's a lot worse now than when
Oh,
I was
wow.
at
That's good that you speak on college
college.
campuses. That's good to
Uh,
hear.
and I think here's what's really dangerous. When you have a bad idea and it's in your
Me, no,
community.
I only have good ideas.
Like, okay, so other people have bad ideas.
I don't
Um,
know what that's like. Yeah, no, I
like,
have bad
tell me
ideas for
about that.
sure.
No.
Yeah, for sure I have bad.
So when you have a
Yeah.
bad idea, but you're like, I'm the only one who believes this bad idea. Okay. But then you go out into the world and other people are like, yeah, the Jews do suck. And I'm just a white middle class dude. You're like, maybe, I mean, they must suck. Like everyone's saying it. Like, so that's what like university does. It's like going to college. Here's
Like
me, like,
talking points.
yeah, like you're like, okay, the Muslim community that I grew up in, we're kind of anti-Semitic. We don't like the Jews. It makes sense, the Jews are our enemies and all this stuff. And then
Yeah.
you got like this white hipster dude who's like, yeah, the Israelis are evil. You're like, I guess we are right. Like,
Yeah, like there's so many of us.
it's like,
How could
yeah,
we be
who
wrong?
knew? Like,
Right.
so,
Who knew?
so I got to this point where, you do all the protests and all that stuff where you think you're changing the world. And I was like, okay, I need to do more. And like for me, more was violence. So I started making a plan to like go to Pakistan, go to a terrorist training camp, and then like actually do something which I was thought was basically commit an act of terror, I guess. Not, I guess,
Wow.
yes, like that's where I
Oh,
was
like in
at.
the Kashmir place
No, no, no,
or
like
like
either in Europe on a Jewish target or in Israel itself.
wow. Wait, I have a question. When you
Sure.
were in that state of wanting to do that, and you had seen propaganda of IDF soldier is hurting a baby when actually that wasn't true.
Yeah.
Whatever the context, whatever it was. But when you saw that, it made you angry because you're thinking justice for, these, it's a baby. How could you do that? So you're someone that is caring about human life. So when you're going out and you're saying, I'm gonna, get them back or whatever, how did that go on in your mind or in general in conversations with, when terrorists actually target like Jewish babies and
Sure.
Jewish children? So how did that play out in your head
So you make
and how was that
justifications.
taught?
Like you make justifications, and I realized that looking back, that's one of the most dangerous things when you go down this route where, and I found myself starting to do it post 9/11 and during the second Intifada, when you see a situation and you go, innocent people have been murdered, a bus with women and children was blown up. It's awful and that's horrible, but when you look at what's happening to the Palestinians, they have no way of fighting back. This is the only way. You start to make these mental jumps to excuse awful things. it's that thing of this is bad, but we're the bigger victims here, so it's understandable. And once you go down that route, it's a pretty
So you lost so much sensitivity that you were able to be like, okay, this is a child that I might kill, but like it's for a bigger purpose.
right. Like they're doing much worse,
Wow.
so
Oh my
it's
gosh.
justifiable.
It's crazy because you're such a humane person. So if someone like you that can have humanity and does and technically always had humanity, but it was skewed and like it was what's the word perverted in the
Yeah.
sense that like like actual like children became dehumanized for you.
Right.
So it's a huge deal that you're out of that. Like
Yeah, it's
and not just out of that. You're not just like, okay, fine, I won't kill people. It's more like, wow, we have to fight against that ideology. That's so scary. That I would have like that's scary that I would have been that person and I don't want other people to do it.
because
That's the
it's just
ultimate, to
it's
get out of that.
it's poison. Like it's so it's it's scary when I think back at how easily it happens. Like it just day upon day, layer upon layer, it happens. And because if you asked me in 2002 or 2003, 2004, any of those years really, do I think Jews are evil? I would have instantly said yes. Like a whole group of people, a whole group of
Wow.
very you like because that was my reality. It was for me, it wasn't an opinion. Like that was just simply the truth.
So you said that you read this book. You told me
Yeah,
not in this interview you told me
yeah,
before you said that you read this book and but you weren't reading it for the purpose of, oh, let me see how I'm wrong. You were kind of like, let me read this crazy book
yeah,
that is wrong so I can prove the book wrong type of thing.
right, yeah.
So
Like
where did you hear about this book in the first place and what book was it? I forgot.
so, I was just in a bookstore, Waterstones, which is like Barnes and Noble, I guess, in the US, and I saw this
Thank you, Waterstones.
like I saw this
Saving
book
lives.
called
Yeah.
The Case for Israel by Alan
Yeah.
Dershowitz.
Yeah.
And like for me, again, Israel was to me, and again, this is so stupid. Like when I think about this, to me, Israel was like the Nazis, but at the
I mean,
same
there
time,
are people that literally think that now. So it's so important that it's
but
good to hear that this is what you thought and now you realize it's not true.
but then the ridiculous thing is, then you're kind of like pro-Nazi because you're anti-Semitic. So it's like, I mean,
Right.
it's kind of like it's a weird tangle of
A
things.
lot of just conveniences mushed together.
Right.
Yeah.
So I thought like Israel like the Nazis who like how can anyone even write this book? Like it was just like uh, insane to me. So I bought it with that purpose of going through it and proving how weak the arguments are and
So were
really
you like morbidly fascinated by this idea that this book was written? You were like,
I think there was just arrogance. Like it was just so much arrogance that I know that I'm right. Like how could anyone even write this? Like this is like it's arrogance with this kind of righteous outrage
but
that
why read it? Most people that are arrogant, they're not even willing to hear information. They're like, that because the very fact to be open to information. So what was motivating you to read it if you were in fact being
I,
arrogant about it? You
I
wanted to like prove it wrong in
yeah,
specific terms. Like you
yeah, I
wanted to
think
be
I was
educated on who your enemy was and then
right.
be able to like
I think
spit
I was
back.
yeah, overconfident also. So I buy this book and I start reading it and like I came across things that I'd never like the idea that the Jewish people are indigenous to the land, that the fact that, the so much of Jewish life revolves around the land of Israel.
Did you hear, was that you hearing it for the first time?
Yeah, like completely. Like
Uh-huh.
the idea that the Jewish people left and were like forced out was completely new to me. Like it was just there was just so many things which you would think this is like basics, like this is like this is were just completely alien and new ideas. The idea that the Zionist organizations accepted every partition plan, it was the Arabs who were like, no, we're good. We're gonna try and kill you instead.
Yeah.
Like, like all of those things were like completely new to me. The idea of Israel, when he talks about Israel today, democracy, and all these things, women's rights, I was like, okay, this is ridiculous. Like it was fascinating to me because I was like how can somebody like write all of this stuff? Like this is wild. Um, so I kind of read it and was like, okay, that's like, I don't know, this is the wildest propaganda I've
Did
ever
you like
read.
have this book in your bedroom and your parents are like, Kaseem, go to
I
the
just
corner. What is this horrible book you have?
it was, but they just didn't like,
Like a slipper or something.
yeah. See, that's like I still have PTSD from a slipper, man, like
Funny.
these are like homing missiles. But but yeah, I read it. I was like, okay, this is just propaganda. I'm gonna disprove this. And there was a book, interestingly, a book written as the counter argument to the case for Israel, uh, written by a Jewish
Kaseem
professor
Hafeez. Oh, okay.
also.
Okay, good. Okay.
So here was the thing which like irritated me.
Yeah.
Okay. So I've met Alan Dershowitz a few times now. I interviewed him for the
Wow.
documentary.
Cool.
And
For
the
which,
case,
oh, for the documentary that you said is, yeah,
yeah.
okay, okay, cool. I'm
So
excited about that.
the case for Israel was it's a great book, but it's really boring because he's written it like a lawyer. So like here's the
Because
allegation
it's
against
just
Israel.
facts, and facts are not
Right.
facts. It's not someone that's creative, or maybe he is creative and he just didn't apply it to that book because usually, like with fiction, nobody's going to write fiction unless they're specifically a creative person.
Right.
You write facts when you know the facts, and that's
And
not necessarily going to be creative and
and
interesting.
every fact has like multiple sources and etc. etc. So I was like, cool. So I read the book, which is written as the counter argument to it,
Yeah.
and it's essentially this emotional diatribe with very little
Like whining,
sources.
kind of.
Like
Yeah.
literally, it's like, and this happened and it was forced out, and the Zionist forces did this, like this long story, and then it's like the source, his second cousin related this story. It's like, I mean, if this many
Yeah.
people were murdered, I'm sure it would have been like documented somewhere. Like if
Right.
Dershowitz can pull stuff out from like 1750,
Yeah.
like so it was very
And
kind
I
of
feel like if you said the other guy was Jewish, right? That wrote
yeah,
this counter. I feel like sometimes Jewish people do that, or anyone does that when they feel like, okay, maybe if I try assimilating, maybe I won't be so hated. And it's like, no, no, no. I also think that we're crazy. Me too. Like, yeah, you should you should I know what you mean when you want to kill us. I know what you mean. So don't kill us because I know what you mean. So we can relate to each other. Like, no, that's not how it works. You
right,
just be yourself, because someone that's hating you, there's something wrong with the person that's hating you. That needs to be the hate needs to be fixed, not someone that's just existing.
right. So that's an interesting point on that. There was
Yeah.
long after when I kind of fell into speaking, somebody who was a leader in the Jewish community in the UK, I was like talking to them, and this question blew my mind. He said, "What can we do so people don't hate us as much?" Like literally, my brain had like, "We'll be right back." Like I was like,
Yeah.
I don't like what?
Again, to the point of you can't fix something you didn't create.
Right,
And obviously there's things you can do to expand on that, like on that hatred. If you say something hateful to someone like Kanye, you're gonna grow the hatred even more. But it's not because of you that the hate exists. It's just there are certain ways to react to it where you're gonna help it grow, or just there's nothing you can do. It's just gonna come at you.
right. So yeah, you just made me think of that. So interesting. But yeah, so I read this book and I'm like, this was stupid. Like this was the counter argument. Like this is just emotional stories without any sort of so I carry on researching. Again, I just because here's the thing, like for years, like I have I hated the Jews, I hated Israel. Like it was literally poisoning me. It's like an obsession. It was not like it was an obsession. Like when you're in a place in your life where you're willing to murder innocent people because of what you believe of them, you don't read one book and be like, oh, all right, cool. Like, bad
Yeah.
choices,
Yeah.
So
Right. It's
like
ingrained. It's
yeah,
brainwashing is real. Yeah.
like it becomes part of who you are. And so I started like researching more, and I was like trying to consciously not just go back to the sources that I'd always used, which basically validated what I believed. And and again, like there's this period of like 2 years where I'm not getting the answer I want. And like my friend group are like, what are you doing? Like, why are you doing this? We know the truth. Like, this is a waste of time.
So you're saying
Um,
you started to see some holes and you're like, wait, do I have to question this now? Let me just make sure if I'm right or wrong
Essentially,
about this.
yeah, like there was this,
You weren't as sure anymore.
right. I think that's the best way to describe it. There was kind of
Mm-hmm.
like there was a chink in the armor.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I got to this point, and like personally, like I was like depressed because think about it. This is something that I was ready to kill and die for. And I'm like, but it's not making sense. Like, this is my whole identity is like formed around this hatred, which is sad in itself, but like that's where I was. So
Yeah.
I then decided, like, okay, I'm going to go to Israel and see it for myself. And again, it wasn't this intellectual curiosity, it was this
Emotional.
I guess this ingrained belief that I still believe that I was right.
Right.
Like going there, like I will see it and I'll see that I'm right. So
You were almost,
2000,
were you almost like excited to have a visceral reaction to
yeah, like
like,
it really was. Like I was, because when you think about at that point, when I thought about Israel,
yeah.
like I'm envisaging, I like for me, I'm thinking it's gonna be like downtown Fallujah in like 2006. Like genuinely, that's what I'm
What's Fallujah?
like
Excuse me.
it was a city in Iraq
I'm
where
not
like
a historian, so you'll have
it
to
had some
pardon.
of the most brutal fighting during the war in Iraq. So it was
Oh,
like a
so you thought
war
it was like a
zone.
war zone.
Yeah,
Oh,
like a
wow.
hundred
Okay.
percent. I remember I remember when I went to Israel, I think 2009 or 2010, and I was working at a college. When I like told my colleagues, "Oh, I'm going to Israel. I'll be back in a week." Honestly, they thought I was like going to like Normandy in 1945. Like they honestly thought I was going to like a full-on war zone. It was kind of funny. Um, but so yeah, I go to Israel in
Wait, so
2007.
they were nervous for you about your life, but when you say that you were gonna, go to training in a terror camp or something, you know how there's like a lot of suicide bombers and then
Yeah,
they believe that there's like 72 virgins in heaven or
yeah,
something like that. Was that part of the idea? Like, were you willing to lose, like you were willing to lose your life basically
yeah,
for the cause? Okay.
yeah. Because
Okay.
like, in Islam,
Yeah.
martyrdom, and again, I don't get into theology of suicide and martyrdom, but the way I viewed it at that time, like martyrdom is like one of the highest kind of goals. It's
Wow.
yeah.
As a parent, I can't imagine wanting your kid to kill themselves.
So with my parents, they they didn't really know much of what was going on. All they saw was that I had become very religious and like had a beard. And for like Pakistani Muslim parents, like their fear since they got to the West is that their children are going to leave the religion behind.
Right. Okay.
So they just saw it from the perspective of, well, he's praying and he's got a beard and
What's
like
your word in Arabic? We say when a kid gives their parent like you give them nahas. How do you say that in Arabic? Do you have a
uh,
word for that?
so the Urdu word, and I think it's like the Arabic, it's fakhr, it's like
Fahald?
fakhr, like F.
Fahald. Okay.
Yeah, it's like you make them like proud. It's like
Right, right,
honored
right.
kind of thing.
Okay. Okay.
So, so that's kind of that was their perspective. Like
Hmm.
my, it's interesting. There were
Will you
times
will you kill me if I well no pun intended
that
if
I've
I
moved on
start
from that
if
life.
I if I send you a new link
No, not
because
at all. No, you're
okay,
good.
okay, I'm sending you a new link. Okay, don't
Yeah.
forget what you're gonna say. Okay. You said that you went to Israel
Yeah.
to kind of prove yourself right, I guess. You were like losing the hate and you're like, "No, wait, I need my hate. Let me go get it.
Right.
Let me go validate it over there."
Yeah. Uh,
And yeah,
And like,
you went
I,
on your own. This was like a
yeah,
solo journey. Wow,
I
okay.
can, I didn't speak any Hebrew. I knew no one in Israel. So I'm like, I'm gonna go to Israel.
And how did your parents react when you said you're gonna go there?
I didn't tell them.
Oh, okay.
Like I was in my 20s, like so I just didn't say anything.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. Um, So yeah, I go to Israel. I so here's the thing, and this is kind of like I see the humor in it now.
Yeah.
So I'd never traveled outside the UK alone. Like I'd been overseas, but never on my own. And so like maybe a mixture of like naivety, I guess.
Yeah.
So I like went on the Home Office website, which is like the State Department in the US. So looked at all the travel advice, got the consulate information, and I get to like Ben Gurion and they ask like, what is the purpose of your visit? And I'm like super honest. Like I like
Oh,
literally where it says like, don't lie and be honest. There are security concerns in that country. I'm like super honest. I'm like, hey, well, like, I kind of, I think Israel is an awful place and I don't really like Jews. So I thought I'd come and see it
oh my,
myself. Like, and so yeah,
oh
I ended up
man.
being in security for like 8 hours, 8, 9 hours. It was, yeah.
That's honestly, that's not a lot of hours for someone
I
saying, quite
know.
honestly, like, yeah, I mean, I feel like I want to kill you guys, but I want to just check first.
The fact that they
Out of
let me
my
into
way.
the country in hindsight, I'm like, oh, could have gone completely differently.
Right. What did
So
they do when you were in security? What did they do? You said they brought you snacks or something, right?
yeah, so I
And they
would say
asked you
like it's not a
questions.
bad experience. Like honestly,
Mhm.
like it wasn't that bad. Like the guy was very apologetic and
Yeah.
like again, he went like I've termed it like he did this like good cop Jewish mother thing where it was like, oh, so where are you planning on going? I'm gonna go here and here. Oh, cool. Like you should also go here if you get a chance. Cool. Would you like something to eat? No, I'm good. No, let me get you something to eat. No, dude, I'm good, but thank you. No, no, I'll get you something to eat anyway. I'm like,
That's so Israeli.
yeah, I know. It's like, why are you even asking me? Like just
Yeah.
so yeah, it just like went back and forth. Like, what made it even more challenging
Yeah.
was so my passport was renewed like maybe a year before, so it was completely blank. So it was like, okay, so where have you traveled? I go to Pakistan a lot. It's like, okay, why? So I explain. It's like, have you been anywhere in the region recently? And yeah, it's 2007, so like whole different Middle East. Like it wasn't as friendly as it's getting now in the Middle East for Israel. I was like, yeah, yeah, I've been to Saudi Arabia. I went to Saudi Arabia a few years ago. And it's
Yeah.
like, okay,
That
so like,
helps.
yeah, so there was just a lot of that, but eventually he was like, it's cool, it's fine, you're free to go.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I like I kind of like bumbled my way from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, like got a shared taxi. Like it was a lot. Like it was, now I think about it, I'm like, I don't know what I was thinking. Like I'd never been to this country, like ridiculously honest with security. And then I'm like, how am I going to get to Jerusalem? I'm going to take a Sharut because that seems like a great way to
Wait,
travel.
what's a sharut?
So it's like an Israeli shared taxi where you basically get into this like minivan with 8 other random people and
Oh wow.
yeah,
Okay.
so
Cool.
so yeah, so that was quickly immersed into the culture. Um and honestly like
And you didn't make a return ticket. You just went to like explore, or you did
no,
you?
I did have a return ticket.
Okay.
Yeah, so no, it's like make sure I get home.
Yeah.
Um and its first stop was in Jerusalem and it literally within days like there was to make like a really long story short, just like talking to people, it humanized people. Like
Yeah.
just speaking to Israelis, speaking to Jewish people, and just seeing like, look, Jerusalem is more diverse than the neighborhood I grew up in. Like, there's you've got Jewish people and Muslims and Christians, like priests just walking around, like
Yeah.
people just, and I think that's what struck just how normal it is.
Yeah.
Like it is very normal. And, I made an effort to talk to people. I spoke to Arab Israelis. I saw Jews from like Ethiopia and like Guatemala. And again, it's like I have this very like for me, if somebody goes back then, like what is a Jew? It's like a dude from Crown Heights. Like that was like this tunnel vision. Like that's it. Like
So you had come across Jewish people in your life, but not in like not even in an acquaintance sense, just in a stranger sense. Or
yeah,
okay.
like I there's been like 1 or 2 times I had seen like where I grew up in Nottingham, like maybe somebody Jewish in like a store, like because they had like a kippah, but there'd never been any interaction.
Mhm.
Um, and so like it's even what's wild to me is like, years later, I was invited to speak at the Orthodox synagogue in Nottingham, which I never knew was there. I walked past this building like almost every year for like
Wow.
4 years and had no idea it was there.
Wow.
Like it's yeah, it was wild.
And it's
So
pretty
yeah,
miraculous that your reason to finally find out what it is was not to go in and bomb it. It was to go
right,
in and talk about not bombing it.
right.
And
Yeah,
that's really nice that that happened.
it's a win. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
so,
A win-win on both
yeah.
sides.
Uh, so so yeah, it was just being exposed to all of that and so like the moment where there was like a genuine like oh crap, like what have I been doing was at the Western Wall. I'd not even known what I was doing. Like literally, like I know what the Western Wall is. Like that's kind of it. Like I go to the plaza. Like so again, I don't have a frame of reference. So when I like think, okay, Jewish holy site, I'm like thinking like Saudi, where you go to Mecca and Medina and it's Muslims only. Like there are signs. So I'm like, I don't know how this works, but let's go see. I, have no issues like going through the metal detectors. It's like walking towards the Western Wall, thinking, "Oh my God, like what am I meant to do?" And again, like it's very overwhelming. I'm like completely out of my element. I'm like really like what is like everything is like shifting, and I'm like, okay, people are covering their heads. I guess I better take one of these kippas and put it on.
Oh my gosh,
So I'm
no
like,
way.
yeah, so
No
I'm like
way.
walking towards the Western Wall with this
No way you put on
kippah.
a cape.
Because everyone else was, I was like, I don't want to be disrespectful. Like,
Oh my gosh.
I'm like standing in front of the Western Wall, like not knowing what to do. And the guy next to me is like, has his hand on the wall, his forehead. I'm like, I ain't do that. Like, I don't just stand here awkwardly, like staring at it. And honestly, like, it's super cliche. And I dislike talking about it because like I don't like cliche stuff. And this is very cliche. But,
Sometimes cliches happen.
you
They
know,
exist for a reason.
Uh, but that was like the moment of clarity. There was just like this moment where I
Wow.
was like, oh my gosh, like what have you done? Like, how have you got to this point? Like, these
Wow.
people that you've met and spoke to have been kind and friendly and just are people. Like, beyond anything, just people. Like, you hated. Like, dude, like, you like, you found happiness when like these people were being murdered in the second intifada for no reason. Like, how have you got to that point as a person? Like,
Wow.
what happened? And that really was like a huge like wake up call. Like that was the moment where I was like, I have got this really wrong. Like I'm wrong. Like I am in the wrong here. Like I'm not the good. Like I'm the bad guy here.
Well, not you were brainwashed, but
So,
you're the good guy that came out of the brainwashing.
so but yeah, I mean, yeah. So it was a very like it's like even now, every time I go back to Israel, like the Western Wall has a lot of significance for me. Not just, I mean, because it's the Western Wall, but it's like it is a place where like essentially changed the whole trajectory of my life. And but yeah, but on that first trip, I then took the rest of my time there to like really go in and explore. Like when I got to Israel initially, it was I'm here to see the negative. After that point, it's like I want to see this more and I want to understand this more. So I went to Yad Vashem. I went to like
Oh wow. What
the
happened when you went to Yad Vashem?
that
I
was
was there. Yeah.
it's it's very difficult not to like I've been there a few times now since then. It's difficult not to it's very emotional and it's like
Wow.
but it's I think what I found there was so in the main kind of building at like one of the last rooms they have kind of the screen with different like quotes from survivors. And there's one, I can't remember it word for word, but it was about how, you know, I my Hebrew is broken, but I'll speak it because
I'm home and I'm safe. So I'm really messing it up. But that kind of just broke me because I was this is the difference. Like this, like every time I speak, like, and I always, we always talk about never again. Like Israel is the guarantee of never again. Like it's a home, it's a Jewish home, and it's the Jewish people no longer having to not even rely, hope on others to speak up and defend them.
Right.
Like, and that's, you walk out of Yad Vashem and they always have tours of like with the soldiers who are there, going through. And I was just like, this makes sense. Like this, yeah, it left a hugely deep impact. And again, it's really interesting. I didn't even realize this. Like, so 2007, I went to Israel for the first time. Around 2010, 11, I started speaking out more. And again, it happened by accident. I wasn't like, I want to tell my story. Like the
Right.
first
That's
time,
usually how successes happen is by accident. You
yeah,
fall
like
into it.
right,
Yeah.
when people were like, we want you to come and speak. I'm like, about what? Like, do you want me to speak like about your story? Why? It's not that good, dude. Like,
It
uh,
is. It's fascinating.
but when you live it, it's just kind of like, all right, it's a
Well, it's just my
routine.
life. Right.
Yeah. So like I've been speaking like for since like 2010, 2011. It was only in 2019, I want to say, where I actually forgave myself for who I was. Like I had not even thought about it, but
That's so important.
when we were making the film, like we revisited a lot of the places. Like we went back to England, went to Israel, and I it was the first time, and it just happened. Like it wasn't like this is what I'm setting out to do. It was the first time I accepted that, okay, like because I essentially separated myself. I was like, that was one person and this is who I am now. It's like it's the same person and you've got to forgive yourself for who you were.
Right.
Like
And there's
that,
also a difference between the thoughts that are put into our heads and the thoughts that we choose to allow to stay in our heads. And you came to a point in your life where you finally had the ability to discern, like, okay, I was given this information, but do I want to keep it? And then you actually chose at that fork in the road. You chose to purge of it, and that is to your credit. That's the point at which you had the choice and you made the choice. So it's
right,
not like you could have chosen as a child, like, no, parents, don't teach me this. Like it's very rare that kids are, that holy and
right.
otherworldly that they can think beyond their parents
I
as young, you
I
know.
think we're just all very harsh on ourselves. Like I think every person is a lot harder on themselves than
Oh,
they
for
would be
sure.
on
Your
others,
own
you
worst
know?
critic. For sure.
Right.
For sure.
So
In a way, I mean, children do, like my kids sometimes question, like, they couldn't believe that you could actually kill an animal to eat it. And so I can't like, I almost feel like becoming a vegetarian just for my kids because I just feel I can't break it to them. Like I can't tell them that, like, they think that the word chicken, it just has two meanings. There's a chicken, the animal, and then there's the chicken that you eat. So what my youngest was like, it's like, oh look, there's turkey outside, like the turkey we eat. And my older ones were laughing at him and they're like, no, mommy, you heard what he said. He thinks it's the same thing. And I was like, yeah, that's funny. And I'm like, oh shoot, like it's sitting in our fridge, and like I don't want to freak them out because
right,
it sounds so scary, like it sounds so vile. Like, how am
right,
I teaching them to eat these cute little creatures that we pet? It's just, I think I mean, it's totally different because it's animals, but that's part of the idea. Like, you grow up thinking, like, I eat chicken. Like, okay, I also see a chicken and I pet it and I think it's cute, but also, like, I eat chicken. And I can't say I'm past it. I get grossed out if I think of it, that it's an animal,
right,
but like, I can somehow, I mean, like, there's different levels of relating, but I can somehow understand, like,
right.
people. And I mean, there's so many like, I read a book on cults by Shia Hecht. I don't know if you heard. It's fascinating how he helps people escape from
Oh, wow.
cults
I
and how
am
they he
fascinated by cults, so I'm probably
yes,
gonna
so
get that.
he deprograms them.
Oh
And
wow.
it's like a whole process because the brain physically, like the neurons, it's literally programmed in a way where they cannot hear what you're saying, and they cannot, it doesn't absorb in a logical way. So when they're telling you no, no, they're not refuting it logically. They're not refuting it. They're not open to it allowing it doesn't even go inside. So he had to basically like hold them until they were ready to hear what he had to say, because if he just first said it in the beginning, they wouldn't even hear him. There was no getting through.
Oh, wow.
So I want to ask you, when you say these speeches, I'm sure there are speeches where you're just, you're speaking to people that are kind of agreeing with you. That's why they're asking you to speak. So it's almost like it's an inspiration for us, and it's like uplifting. But do you ever have, I know you said you speak on college campuses. Have you ever had, first of all, in your audience, like any Muslim that was an extremist that turned around, but also have you ever spoken for like a Muslim crowd? I'm curious about those two things.
So I've spoken to, predominantly on college campuses, I've spoken to groups which are very mixed, and I've spoken to groups, like I've been invited by, say, a Hillel on campus.
Right.
Predominantly the audience is Muslim. Like that has happened a few times.
An Hillel on campus?
Yeah, because they'll like open it
Really?
to the whole thingy, and
Interesting.
so it varies by campus. And I've had some also, but like I had very early on when I started speaking, and it's the reason I'm laughing is like it's weird and British and dark, but like I did an event at Nova Scotia in Canada at I think it was St. Mary's University, and it turned into like a complete mess. Like it got shut down, and like the campus police came in. This dude got very upset when I answered his question, and everything got out of hand.
So you're the like Muslim Ben Shapiro or something?
I get like essentially that, like it was just ridiculous. Like it just, to this day, I'm like, it was weird. But the thing that stands out to me to this day, and that was 2000 and I want to say 2010 or 11. The thing that stands out to me, the guy who like asked the initial question, he had Ugg boots on. I was like, I didn't know that they made Ugg boots for guys. Like I just said to I was like, that was
You didn't know they made Ugg boots for what?
For guys. I was like,
wait, you told him that?
Yeah, like I was like, you wearing Ugg boots? And
the event got shut down because
it wasn't that wasn't the catalyst. Like it was already going south before that, but that just like I was like,
what are those?
Yeah, like
oh no.
So yeah.
Oh
but
my
no,
God, that's funny.
I've had
I love my
hostile
Uggs.
audiences, and even sometimes the Christian audiences. Like I've spoken at churches where still there are people who are anti-Semitic and don't even realize it. Like it's so like just ingrained in like how they see the world.
But have you ever had like someone come up to you and be like, I used to think this, thanks to you, now I don't think that anymore?
So I wouldn't say that's ever happened just at an event. It's happened when I've stayed in touch with people and we've continued communicating.
That makes sense, because humanized, because you're having a relationship. The whole thing is that it's emotional. So if you have a logical refuting, it's not going to help because it's logical to begin with. The point is that once you create this emotional window, you're like, oh, like the coping mechanism isn't necessary anymore. And I wonder, you can tell me if it's true, if like when you had this moment at the Western Wall, if it was a point at which we were talking about earlier, like having a coping mechanism and wanting to belong to something and not allowing that to fall, because if it does, then everything crumbles with it. And maybe at that moment you felt like it's safe to let those walls down because I can fall and I will be caught by all these like nice people around me. It won't make me suddenly like defenseless. I will open myself up to friends. And was that part of
so I've never thought about it in that context, like to be honest, but I think that's very likely. No, I think it is 100% likely, because that's literally what happened. Like when I went back to the UK, like everything crumbled. Like I stopped, like I gave up on religion altogether. Like I was like, I've been lied about this, so it probably all lies. Wow. And that's the thing. Like for me too, I went through a process, like I think we all do as we get older and mature and have more life experiences. And when I was speaking in like 2011 onwards, there was a lot of things that I was bringing into my speaking which I don't think was helpful. I think I was still very angry at my past. I was still very angry at my past, which I was almost taking out by attacking Islam, which I don't think was productive or helpful.
So you kind of rechanneled your victimhood until you were ready to not be a victim anymore.
Yeah, fully. And I think that made me and this is from a personal perspective. Like
Yeah.
I'm not looking for people because like I try and have this conversation a few times and people are like, no, you're a great speaker. It's like I'm not looking for positive feedback here. I'm like trying to share an experience. Like
Okay. Yeah,
I
I know what
think
you mean.
that it didn't make me I could have been a much more effective speaker if I had worked through the personal issues and baggage I was bringing with me. Like I'm like when I speak to audiences now, when there are a number of Muslims, like I can relate to you because like we have a lot of intersecting. If I am attacking you because of how I felt and I'm attacking something which is sacred to you, like you're already done with me. It doesn't
Exactly.
matter
I mean,
what
they
I
won't be
say.
receptive to anything you have to
Right.
say, for
And I
sure.
completely understand.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that I've gone through that process and matured because look, there are people out there who I see who, and again, I get it. Like there's no who have a horrible experience with Islam growing up or any religion, and then just make it core of what they do to like attack that religion. And it's
Yeah.
like I get it. Like I get it. You were hurt, and that's awful. But like, what are you achieving here?
You know what's interesting? We have I grew up with um an Iranian girl that lived in our attic.
Okay.
And it sounds like an Anne Frank story, but not Anne Frank. Yeah, that's her name. I get mixed up with Lisa Frank, which is like the rainbow sticker company.
Yeah.
That's really terrible of me to say, but it just got mixed up for a second. Anyway, so she lived in our attic. It was nice. It had like a kitchenette, a bathroom, whatever. She lived up there for a time, and she became like an older sister to me.
Yeah.
And it was so interesting because she used to say that when she was a kid, she didn't know what this meant. She just told my mother. She was very close with my mother. And she said, "Oh yeah, I think she would call her mom. She's like, "Oh, when I was little and we would be in trouble, my parents would punish us and they would say like to call us a derogatory term. They would say Yahud."
Oh
And
wow.
she didn't know that it like meant, but also it was pretty funny that like it's interesting because the Iranians, like she said, they were against Muslims, but I thought like I thought there's a lot of Muslims in Iran. I don't know. So she like her father was one time telling the new neighbor like, "Oh yeah, I don't like these Muslims, they're this and they're that." And the guy was like, Mr. And he said his last name. He's like, "I am a Muslim." He's like, "Oh no." That was just a random funny story that she shared with us.
Yeah.
But this is someone that like she came from Iran, and she was also taught this. This is another side of the earth, like Jews were purged from Iran too
Yeah.
many times over. But it's interesting, like we have this humanity together where we're close, and she almost like became part of the family. So I think that helped her like have, because she has this emotional connection. It's different for her, whereas
Right.
maybe a lot of people she knows don't have that similar emotional connection, so anything she tells them doesn't really matter. They don't share that bond. But wait, so did you have anyone come to you and tell you like you
So I have had
changed my mind?
a few people that I am still in touch with who'll be like, oh, I've really seen the world differently, and I'm really glad that I could like one kid. I don't know if I could like search through my emails, but he basically was like, I came to your event to protest you. Like this was 3.5 years ago. And the last time I had got an email with him from him was like 6 months ago. And I came to protest you, but like I'm so glad I came to that event. It like changed my whole outlook on things, and
Oh,
like I realized that how deep like my hatred had gone. And
it's such a big deal when you do this, because each person, like we say, that each person is a whole world. It's true, but even literally, it's true because each person has their own set web of connections and people that they're going to influence in turn. So you could be literally saving thousands of lives through your work. I mean, you are, through the work that you do. I was curious, one more thing.
yeah,
When did you become Christian in this whole story?
yeah.
Because I didn't know that in the beginning of this
Yeah,
interview.
so I left the UK and moved to Canada in 2013.
Mhm.
And that was purely because there was a number of factors. Like and maybe you can relate to this. When you grow up in like a tight-knit community like the Pakistani Muslim community was, and then
Yeah.
you're the outsider, it's very difficult. Like it was, and then I would get death threats and like my issues with my family and all these things. And I got to a point where I was like, I don't want to live like this, like looking over my shoulder constantly. This is a lot. Like it was just emotionally draining.
Right.
So I moved to Canada. Random place in Canada. I moved to Winnipeg, which I'd never heard of up until 2012, where I was invited to speak there and then fell in love with the city. Most Canadians hate it because it's freezing all the time, but I moved to Winnipeg and so I'm living there. And just before I moved, I got an email from an organization called Christians United for Israel asking for me to come and speak. Now, I had had very little interaction with Christians who support Israel. The one interaction I had was so weird that I was like, I am like not gonna I'm not doing this. But like
Funny.
they kept like emailing and I was just very
Evangelicals?
yeah.
Okay.
So I was being very British where I was saying no without saying no. Like I kept just pushing it off. And then they were like, look, we need an answer. And I'd been in Canada for like 2 months, didn't have a job at that point. It's the middle of winter. And this is like a campus tour in California, like the worst campuses like Berkeley and Davis and all these things. So I was like, let me read this. So it was going to be me, Irving Roth, who was a Holocaust survivor who I'd never met at that point, and Father Gabriel Nadav, who was a Greek Orthodox priest from Israel. So I was like, okay, this is 10 days in the sun. You get paid, you meet some cool people, you come back. Like, this is a win-win. Like, it's fine. So I was like, all right, cool, I'll do it. So I went. So I met Irving for the first time, and I was just surprised by like how cool the people were, like genuinely like committed to this issue. And I learned more about the organization and like at the time, even now, there's a new executive director, but the previous one was Jewish, the current one is Jewish.
Oh,
It's
wow.
like we're a non-conversionary organization.
Oh,
Like we
wow.
don't
That's
convert like
that's nice.
yeah, so I was like, this is interesting.
Because
But I mean,
Judaism is not a proselytizing religion, but I know that Christianity is, so that's interesting that they were just
yeah.
you do you, we do us, and we come together in peace. That's really nice.
Right. And that was so I was like, this is interesting. And like I made some good friendships. I went back to Canada and then I got invited to their big conference in July to speak to the students. So I went to that, met more of the organization's leadership. And after the main event, the Night to Honor Israel they have, I like went up to the director and was like, I want to work for this organization. And he was like, well, I don't know, it's challenging. You live in Canada, we're US based, like you're not Christian, like there's a lot of factors.
Yeah,
And we kind of left it at that. I went back to Canada. I had a job. I was working for a Jewish organization.
that's nice.
So I had a job, and then it was around January, they invited me, Christians United for Israel, Kufi, invited me to speak at their leadership conference. And literally 2 weeks before, I had quit my job because here's the thing, and this is why I'm not gonna name the organization, and this is just my experience.
Right.
I don't want to be paid to do nothing. Like
You
that's
want
just
you want to feel purpose.
yeah, it's like especially if you're a nonprofit, if I'm getting paid to do nothing,
Like you don't want to take out from
yeah,
the
like this is not cool. So I resigned, had no backup plan. I was like, it's fine, I'll figure it out. Went to speak at their leadership conference, and they offered me a job. Like, so I joined the organization. Again, wasn't a Christian. I'd been like exploring religion for a number of years after I abandoned Islam. And I don't know, just something just drew me into Christianity. I became a Christian. Kept it very quiet because at that point there was still a kind of up in the air of whether I'd be going back to England or not because of immigration, just processing stuff.
And how are your parents at this point with the
So I
conversion?
still like me and my dad don't speak at all. My parents are divorced. Me and my dad do not speak at all. My mom have a very strange I don't know if you'd call it relationship, but in the last few years, there's been some contact, but not a ton. It's very surface level.
Mm.
So yeah, that's kind of really where it is with family. It's not great. It could be better, but it could also be worse.
Hopefully one day it will be better.
Right. So that's the hope. So
Okay.
yeah.
I'm a very curious person. I have another
No,
question
like
based
go
on what you're
for it.
saying. You shared a video on this topic, and I see liberals complaining about this and conservatives defending it, like Jewish conservatives, and I want to know, like, what is the truth? And I feel like you're the person that would know.
Yeah.
You shared this video, and it actually further proved it, so I was confused. So I think I misunderstood the video. The idea that I was always like very excited about evangelicals because I'm like, wow, like that's so nice. It felt like the opposite of anti-Semitic to me.
Yeah.
And I was told by liberals, like, ha, you think that Christians who are evangelical, like, you think that they care about you. They don't care about you. It's just that Israel is like to further their, like, if you guys go to Israel and you're in the land and you get your Zionistic dreams come true or whatever it is, meaning like that you can live in Israel, then it furthers their like ideological like their purpose, which is the eventually the I'm excuse my ignorance, I don't know the exact idea, but the fact that like the Messiah will come in Israel or something for them, and the Jews will either like be saved by returning to Jesus or something, or they won't, but either way it will basically help the Christian cause, and it will only be through like all the Jews dying or something. I don't know, this is what I was told. So
Right.
how, like, what's the truth to that, and what is like off about that?
So like I always try and be direct as possible. So there are a lot of Christians who believe that. Like they genuinely are. There are Christians. And when you talk about the evangelical community, it's very broad, like with a lot of different variations of like belief and things. So there are Christians who believe that. There are Christians who support Israel purely for that reason. Like genuinely, there are.
Sorry, believe what? Like they believe that
So
that Jews will eventually die or something?
so they believe that the Jews have to be returned to the land of Israel to
Mhm.
hearken, the return of Jesus and this kind of apocalyptic kind of war, which is going to happen at the end of time. And, a lot of Jews are going to be killed. Some will like accept Jesus, this kind of like doomsday scenario.
So they're
Like,
not saying we want Jews dead. They're saying inevitably it's going to happen
essentially, yeah.
unless they're saved.
Right.
Okay, got it.
And
Okay.
so their support is based on this idea that the Jewish people controlling the land of Israel is a good thing. It
They're like
helps.
a means to an end, basically.
Right, 100%.
Okay.
Now, theologically, also, I'm a biblical theology major
Oh,
in school at the moment.
okay, cool. I'm in school at the moment too, but not for that.
Oh, nice. What are you doing? What are you studying?
Psychology.
Oh,
That's why I was talking about
yeah,
Kohlberg's theory
makes
more
sense.
recently.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's cool.
Yeah.
The Bible says itself, like the Christian Bible says in Jesus' own words, nobody knows the time of his return other than God. So it's not like bingo where you get the right points and he's back. Pastor Hagee, the founder of CUFI, has been very specific about that. So Christians United for Israel as an organization, like we have 11 million members, and like we have
11 million. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, we have in the organization a rabbinical advisory board because we're non-conversionary.
Okay, even if we have only like 10 minutes left, I don't want you to get cut off. So I'm gonna make you crazy if it's
No,
okay
it's fine.
with you.
You're fine. Yeah,
And
sure.
I'm gonna do this again. Okay. Sorry. I think next time I learn my lesson, I'm gonna upgrade to pro, or I'm gonna do a different program. But
You're good.
I'm sorry, there's just so much fascinating information here. Okay. Don't forget what you're gonna say. Okay, so it's really sad, just for whoever's listening, for the past, I don't know how long, it wasn't recording, which is really, really sad because we had a really incredible conversation amongst all the others. And just to summarize, it was basically, we were discussing evangelicals, Christians, how he became Christian. He's part of a Christian organization, CUNYI, right?
CUFI.
Christians
United for Israel.
United for Israel. And he said there's 11 million of them. And basically I was asking him about the ideology about some evangelicals who believe that at the end of time, that Jews need to be destroyed for the Messiah to come, otherwise they need to be saved by Jesus or whatever it is. And he was basically explaining to me that there's some that do believe that and many don't, including him, who he's still questioning. You can correct me if you're wrong. He's still questioning what exactly will happen, but definitely not the idea that it doesn't make sense to him that he, like, because he doesn't want us dead at the end of time after all this that God has put us through. He feels like it's for a purpose. And yeah, it was a pretty fascinating conversation, and I'm so upset that it wasn't recorded. But if you want to add anything before we hang up, that if I missed repeating anything, that
no, I think you
so upset
got
it wasn't
everything.
recording that.
Yeah, it's
That was a good conversation.
it was.
Yeah.
I think one of the things I've always found, so the founder of the organization, who is, it's a Christian pastor from Texas, he had a friendship with the Orthodox rabbi in San Antonio, Rabbi Aryeh Scheinberg, who passed away a few years ago. Like, they were best friends.
That's
and
cute.
people would ask, like, how do you guys reconcile it? Like, when you talk about the end of time, and they would always answer, when Messiah comes, we'll ask him, is it your first or second time? And then one of us will have to make a change based on the answer.
Like, that's a funny joke, but it's also kind of true. It's
yeah.
like, that's pretty funny.
So,
Well, I mean, like, it sounds cliche, but love conquers all, for sure.
yeah,
By the way, something that I think is impressive of this whole conversation, I have to tell you, I have no idea if you're a liberal or conservative. I'm thinking at this point, maybe you're conservative, but I still have no idea. And I think that's so interesting that we were able to have this whole conversation without getting fired up about politics. I don't know if that was on purpose, that you steer away from politics.
It's not that it wasn't on purpose, but
Okay.
I wouldn't classify myself as either, to be honest.
Okay.
Because I'm like,
I like that.
yeah,
You have your own set of
Right.
opinions, and some of them fit in one ideology, some of them don't, and you can't.
yeah,
I'm definitely leaning more towards conservatism, but I'm not by any means like in a box. So I
right.
understand the idea
And
that
I think that's the best way to be. Like, ultimately, who I am and what I think is defined by my experiences and how I see things. And
for sure.
like, I don't need an out of the box ideology to kind of like hang on to. I think and I think that's one of the sad, like, what with, like, similarly, I was like, I don't know, like, are you a liberal or are you a conservative? Like, I had no idea in our conversation, and I think that's a good thing. Like,
Yeah, for sure.
because
You know what? That is part of the fight against generalizing. And
right.
you're forced to conform to a group. And once you do that, everyone else is othered. And yeah, sometimes labels matter because it helps you understand what's going on and summarize all your beliefs in one word. But sometimes it doesn't encompass all your beliefs. Many times it doesn't, or even most of them. So that it goes to show even more that you think for yourself. And I would encourage you to keep being you and thinking for yourself, because that's what brought you where you are today.
And
appreciate
that.
That's something to emulate, for sure. To
Thank
just
you.
be yourself.
Be you.
Love conquers all. It really does, honestly. Like,
no, honestly, it's
you
said, oh yeah, I don't know if we recorded that, but you said, like, generalizations just are never good. Like,
it's the
you
most
can't,
dangerous thing you can do.
like,
I feel
the generalization, like, the assumptions people make about me, and I'm like, based on one piece of information, okay, that's interesting.
Right.
So
yeah. And my mother, actually, she taught me growing up, like, because the same way, like, you might have been taught to hate us, we were taught that we were hated. And we were also sometimes, because we were taught we were hated, so we grew like some animosity towards, like, oh, maybe people hate us, so we're like self-protective. But my mother, like, we had this German neighbor, and my mother was so friendly and nice to them, and her husband was in, like, the German war in the Wehrmacht. And she, like, we used to go, Mrs. Giese, we used to go to her house, and she used to show me her dollhouses. She had crosses all over the place. And I would come home, and my father would be like, what were you doing at Mrs. Giese's house? Like, me and my neighbor Jessica, we used to go and, like, in her garden, and I don't know, and, like, look at her flowers. And then my mother, like, she's friends with everyone, so she would always take a taxi, and there was always a Pakistani, and she became really, really close with this Pakistani taxi driver that they became like family. Like,
Yeah.
you'd be like, oh, it's Mrs. Samuels again. And they were just like, she taught me this of like seeing people beyond their culture, beyond their history, beyond everything, and just like to see the individual.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's really
Thanks, Mom.
cool. Yeah, like if more people were like that, we'd
Yeah,
have a nicer
sure.
place.
For sure. So thank you so much. This was like the biggest honor, for real. I'm so, and I think you're so courageous for talking about whatever you find that is like, it's embarrassing that it happened. The fact that you're embarrassed, first of all, is testament to the fact that that's not what you are right now, and it never was, because you wouldn't ever become embarrassed of something that you truly quintessentially were inside. It would remain. And so just thank you for your courage. Thank you for your time, like a lot of time. Thank you for your insight and your history, and I really appreciate it. I think this will inspire even a little bit of people, or hopefully a lot of people. And I guess we'll talk about your shoes
Yes,
after
yes.
in the DMs. But what was I gonna say? What's the word? I can't think of words lately. Regards to your wife, and I'm glad that part was recorded. How you met your wife, and I'll send you over the snapshot of like what I'm gonna post as like the advertisement of the recording, and maybe we can both post it if you approve of it. I'll first ask for you to approve of the summary, and this will go on YouTube and all the podcast platforms, Apple or Spotify and all that fun stuff. Okay, so thank you so much. Really,
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
Amazing meeting you, and fascinating hearing your story. Okay.
Okay, have a great rest of the day.
You too.
Bye.